Good. Okay, so thank you so much for joining. And I have to speak a little bit lower. Haven't been feeling well. Mom has been knocked out the last week or so. I had strep. And sometimes when I get strep, I'm mamish like, it's not just like 3 days, 4 days. It really, really knocks me out. I don't know exactly why, but I'm still recovering. So I'm still a little bit weak, but I needed this more than any of you need it. You know, it's when I'm not able to give over and I'm not able to see you and to learn with you. I think that this is a chelik of my recovery. So, but I'm still trying to take it a little bit easy. So, Be'ezer Hashem, let's try not to get too excited about the Rebbe's Torah. It's very difficult. But we'll try our best to keep our cool and to pretend like we're learning, Sichos HaRan or something. I'm kidding. Should get excited about that also. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. We have a phenomenal, thank you so much. Yeah, it's nothing serious. Baruch Hashem, getting better every day. So we have a phenomenal Torah to learn, actually 2 Torahs to learn together. One of them is much shorter. One of them is much, much, much longer. Sichos HaRan Sicha Mem. My brain is not all there either. But Sicha Mem is very, very lengthy. We're going to try our best to get through it. I didn't want to throw in too many peripheral sources to hop out and in because I want to just learn this Torah with you. And it's sort of the grand finale, Sicha Mem, of this series of sichas that we've been learning, which are all on the topic of Emunah. We spent the last couple of weeks speaking about Rebbe Nachman's teachings on Emunah. Sicha Mem is the grand finale of that. And the culmination of Sicha Mem is actually a very beautiful Torah on the Dreidel and some of the inner meaning of what we're going to be doing. So it's been the Siyata D'Shmai that we had since the beginning. If you remember, somehow it always lines up with all the Yom Tovim. Crazy, mamish crazy. Every single time, come to a Chag, there's something applicable to what this happened Rosh Hashanah time, it happened Tisha B'Av time. And so over here we're coming to Chanukah, and of course we have to start Chanas already. And it's already over here now to sort of change the clock, and it gets dark at 4 o'clock now. And so that means the Chanukah is already in the air, and we have to start our Chanas for it. It's a very exciting time. Very, very exciting time. Just one announcement before we jump in. Be'ezer Hashem, LPI, you heard it here first. LPI, we're starting a brand new program, Be'ezer Hashem. The program is called, let's see if I can remember, it's called Princess Seekers, the Princess Seekers podcast. Be'ezer Hashem, the idea is where I will be sitting down in one-to-one conversations with you in 25 minutes, half hour over Zoom. People who feel that Hasidus has changed their lives, people who did not come from a Hasidic background, but people from across the spectrum who feel as if their discovery of the Baal Shem Tov's derech and of the teachings of Hasidus b'chlal, Rebbe Nachman b'frat, but all Hasidus, that it's radically shifted, their experience with Yiddishkeit, and punctuated with those episodes. We'll be releasing them Be'ezer Hashem once a week with a wide spectrum of different ages and backgrounds and men and women, whole spectrum punctuated. I'm going to be able to have conversations with some of the leading mashpiyim, and those will also be to hear their story, but also to be able to clarify some questions that all of us may have. I know that I have many. In this regard of how to really, hold on to this path, which we're all pioneering in a certain way. It's like some people call it neo-Hasidus, but just Hasidus as non-Hasidim, right? Or not classically seen as, part of that community. How can we sort of, navigate that? And so, Be'ezer Hashem, if any of you have any questions that you'd like answered in those sessions, please send them to me. Be'ezer Hashem, I have a long list of questions. But we will be Be'ezer Hashem. Thank you so much for the little bit you were here. Yosef, thanks for coming. But we'll be able to clarify all of those things. And if you would like to have one of these conversations with me and you think that you fit the bill, Be'ezer Hashem will be making public a link to a Google form where you can fill out your information. And we're going to try to have a great lineup of guests. Okay, so Be'ezer Hashem, that's something very, very exciting that's coming up. Okay, so now without further ado, let's jump in to our limud for tonight. I'm going to share my screen as always, and let's jump into it. Okay, so again, if you're just tuning in, I apologize. My voice is not so 1000%, and I'm trying to take it a little bit easier. So if I sound a little monotonous or more monotonous than I usually sound, that's why. Okay, so I hope you'll stick with me. So here we begin with Rebbe Nachman, Sichos HaRan Lamed Tes. A short Torah, independent Torah on its own. Then we're going to get into Sicha Mem, which is the bulk of tonight. And today we hope, Be'ezer Hashem, we're going to get through the whole thing. It's very long. But let's first take a look at Sicha Lamed Tes. And the tzaddik says, very, very beautiful Sicha. Ra'ui sheyargish tzar ziyachid. The tzaddik said that it's fitting to feel the pain of an individual. Of course, the Rebbe is speaking from experience. This is a person who not only suffered as an individual, but part of the job description of a Rebbe is that you become a therapist. You have to be. You have to be a person who's sitting and listening as people line up, really for nothing more. Obviously, they want your brachas, but they also want they want to unburden themselves to the tzaddik. And the Rebbe says it's very important to feel that tzar of a yachid, mikol shekein tzaras rabim. Certainly, if the masses are suffering, and if the world is hurting, and if communities are hurting, whether it's a specific community or just many people, a proliferation of people that are going through things, we should feel that. That should impact us. Chas v'shalom, believe, he says. We have to feel that in our hearts. He says it's very possible to hear of suffering. And it's not like you don't know what the pain is, right? We hear of poverty. Okay, Hashem, I hope that all of us, have managed to avoid a situation of abject poverty, but we can dream it up. We can think of what that is to live on the street. Maybe it's beyond, the pale of what we might be able to imagine, which we have to thank Hashem for even that, if that's true in our life. But to feel that, we can think of what that is. We can conjure up an image of what that might be. But it's possible to know intellectually that a person is suffering, but that it doesn't really go in. Doesn't really go into the lave. We don't feel it in our hearts. So he says, at least if it's difficult for to feel each individual's pain, at least when the masses are suffering, we should feel that. Our hearts, like Rebbe Nachman said, he didn't want that a Jew should have a heart of stone. He said famously that Breslover is osios lev basar, comes from a pasuk, a heart of flesh, right? A feeling heart. Rebbe Nachman wanted that we should have feeling hearts. That we should have a heart that feels the pain of the world, a heart that's impacted, that doesn't become jaded, that doesn't become numb, that doesn't become, just so overexposed to pain that pain stops meaning anything anymore. Rebbe Nachman wanted us to live in reality and to know that the world is full of suffering. The world is also full of tremendous joy and beauty and wonder. Those two things are true at once. There are 7 billion people on this planet. There's a lot going on at any given moment. And at the same moment in time, there are people being born and there are people leaving the world. And there's a great abundance of laughter and a great abundance of crying. And those two things go hand in hand. By Kadosh Baruch Hu, he sees it all. And it all of it exists. Like it exists within ourselves. We have a little bit of pain and a little bit of joy. And it's difficult when somebody asks you, how are you doing, to just sum it up, because we operate on so many different levels. And, one part of me might be frustrated, but on the other hand, there's a higher, broader part of me that's able to say, okay, but I'm breathing, right? And Baruch Hashem, I have a roof over my head and I have clothing, and that brings me to life and that gives me joy. But both things can be true at once. One need not negate the other. But Al Kopanim, there are people that are hurting, right? And Rebbe Nachman wanted that we should be alive to the pain of the world, and we shouldn't be naive to think that there's no suffering. This world is filled with suffering, but we should feel that suffering. We should care about that suffering. That says something to me, that does something to me, that moves me. And even if that doesn't mean that I'm, even if it doesn't mean that I'm able to get up right now and to go out and march for this cause or for that cause, or to devote my life to trying to take care of hunger in Africa, whatever it is. But I should care that there are people starving in Africa. I should care about that. That should bother me. It's not so nice to say, because it's very nuanced and we can't compare and contrast, but the same, we have to ask ourselves, and I each of us has to ask themselves individually, but I ask myself this all the time. Obviously, all of us as part of this nation, that very, very, very barely survived, only a few decades ago, barely survived. And all of us, when we read the history, and all of us, when we think about the way in which the world was silent, right? And like there were certain speakers, certain thinkers, certain historians who each in their own way, Elie Wiesel, A.J. Heschel, there were those that looked at what was going on and they said, in a free society, I think this was a Heschel line, he said, in a free society, a few are guilty, but all are responsible. And the silence, that resounding silence, is something that made a real difference. And that if they would have felt the tsar of the rabbim, it could have made a real difference. And we're upset with the world. Where were you? Why the apathy? Why the silence? But I think at the very same moment, we have to ask ourselves, do any of us care about the millions of people that are being brutally murdered, or have been in Syria and other places around the world? And if we can't answer that we genuinely care about that, so why should people have cared about us? It's a painful question. But in a moment of honesty, we have to reflect on that. And we have to wonder, how can I have this sort of double standard where I hold the world responsible for not caring about millions upon millions, millions upon millions of civilized, good, upright, upstanding people in Europe, but I don't necessarily care about the plight of other peoples around the world. Even if that doesn't move me again, and I only have a certain limited amount of resources, and as a Jew, I want to focus on my people, and I want to focus on doing chesed with our own, etc. And nobody's saying that everybody needs to stand up and fight for every single cause in the world. The world is filled with causes, but at least that my leiv should be yargish kei vatzar. There are children crying. Right now, somewhere there's a kid who's crying. There's a kid whose eyes have seen something that a child's pair of eyes should never have seen, and that has to hurt me. And if that doesn't hurt me, then there's something wrong. And that's a very, very important. That's a very, very important perspective. And that's what Rebbe Nachman is saying over here. Our own pain, meaning our own people's pain, and the pain of our communities, and the pain of Yidden, and the pain of kids, and the pain of adults, certainly. But our hearts should be big enough at this point in an interconnected, globalized world. Our hearts should be big enough that our perspective should be broad enough to be able to bring the pain of the world into the picture. This doesn't mean to become depressed, and this doesn't mean that every single minute of my life I have to be weighed down by the realities of this world. It doesn't mean that. Just because we're exposed to it, it doesn't mean that we have to allow that to drag us down. The reason being that the same way we're exposed to all the pain of the world, we're also exposed in every minute to all the joy of the world. And the world is filled with both of these things. And the Zohar Kodesh says we have two chambers in our hearts, the right side and the left side. And the right side is filled with rejoicing, and the left side is filled with pain. And like Rav Shlomo used to sing, Hazorim bedima berina yiksayru. It's those that are able to march along the way with both joy and tears, with tears and joy, like I spoke about at the Kumsitz. Hamatzah Shabbos yiksayru. It's those people who will reap the benefits of living a life of feeling, of living a life of being alive, of living a life with eyes wide open to every emotional experience of the world. Is the Bechin of Yaakov Avinu, of course, the Bechir Sheba Avos, right? Who was the feeling person, who was the human being that felt, that loved intensely, and that grew angry intensely, and experienced the whole realm of the human experience. This is what it is to be a Jew. Okay, so this is what Rebbe Nachman wants from us. That our hearts should be hearts of flesh, that we should feel the pain of the world. And Rebbe Nachman says if a person does not feel tzarich lahakas harosh bekir, gotta bang your head against the wall. That doesn't mean literally. I know what this means is lahakas harosh bekiras levavai. You gotta somehow bang your head, which means intellect, into the walls of your heart. Kemuva b'makam acher is brought in another place. To take the intellect that we know, but it's not enough. Rebbe Nachman said it's not enough to just know a lot of things. We have to bring that down into the heart. How do we feel differently now that we learned something new? How does that impact our lived experience? How does that make us more refined? How does that make us more elevated? How does that make us more feeling? That a Jew needs to bring the intellect down into the heart of an hated. And we should understand this very well. And I believe that this is really the yesod, even though it's some obscure, just tucked away little teaching in the 39th slot in Sichos HaRan. This is really the foundation of Rebbe Nachman's whole path. This is really it. What did Rebbe Nachman want from his Hasidim? What did Rebbe Nachman want from the Jewish world? He wanted them to be feeling. He wanted them to be feeling. He wanted them to feel the ups. He wanted them to feel the downs. He wanted them to be alive, not to be dead. Doesn't mean to be dancing every second, but it means to be living, to mamish be living. That's what he wanted. Achakach Reb Nassan says afterwards, Shemati b'shmoisha Amar, that the Heilige Rebbe said, Shezo b'chinas vayasiv Chizkiyahu panav al hakir, which literally means that Chizkiyahu turned his face to the wall and davened. Rebbe Nachman says, no, it means deeper. That Chizkiyahu turned his face, which of course is a reflection of the pnim. The panim is the face, but it's the same letters as pnim, is the interiority of that which exists beyond the face. behind the face, which is the mind and the intellect, and he drew that down, Vayasiv, and he turned that, Vayasiv Chizkiyo Panav El Kir, to the walls of his heart, El Kiras Halev, and Kaniskala El Ki Ikra Panav Chachma Vadas, Who are Hapanim Kamuva B'Makam Acher. It's that intellect, it's that awareness, that consciousness. Rebbe Nachman says, take that and bring that into your heart. That's the sum total of Chasidus. That's the sum total of the Baal Shem Tov's derech, the Yadata Hayom, to become incredibly, incredibly broad in our knowledge, in our awareness, to then allow that to elevate and to transform our hearts. Okay, so that's Sicha Lamed Tes, a very, very beautiful Sicha. I could go on about that for the next hour, but we really need a lot of time for Sicha Mem, okay? But the takeaway from that is, in a world filled with news, and in a world filled with news feeds, it becomes so easy to become numb. And it stops meaning things, because news naturally, because this is human nature, but the news wants to make money like everybody else. And so they pick up dafka on the most shocking and the most atrocious, horrible stories that exist, which are far and few between, by the way, in the lived reality of the world, but there are 7 billion people. So there's enough, to keep the daily feed pumping. But we live in an overwhelmingly good world. We live in a phenomenally good world and a good society. And it's a nebuch, because the news misrepresents what reality really is. Because on a day-to-day basis, Baruch Hashem, we don't witness atrocities with our own eyes. But if you'd only read the news and you never step foot outside, you would think that that we live in hell, because we do in a way. We do, but we also live in heaven. And both of those things are true. But because we become so exposed to this steady stream of things, pain stops meaning anything to us. And when that happens, we lose the princess. When that happens, we lose that youthfulness. When that happens, we lose everything that makes us human. We become just, technical robots that just process information like a computer. So then HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't need to create us, but he wanted human beings. Rebbe Nachman says, hold on to your humanity. Hold on to your humanity in whatever little way. Take 5 minutes and think about the children of the world that are starving or that witnessed nebuch, parents, siblings, horrible things. Like I said, no child's eyes should ever have to witness or should ever have to experience. And so long as there's one child in the world that's in pain, that's our achrayus. That's our achrayus. Now again, if we're not going to stand like A.J. Heschel did with Martin Luther King, at the front of the civil rights movement, if we're not going to do that in today's iteration of whatever that is, or whatever injustice there is, and we can't do that, and it's not our place, that's a conversation for a separate time. But at least to daven, at least to put a good word in and say, Rabbanu Shalom, here's one Jew who's in pain that the world is broken. Here's one Jew that's in pain that there are people who I'll never meet who know nothing about Jews. But it's my responsibility as a person who b'shvili nivra olam, that each of us have to believe that the world was created for us. What does that mean, for us? To satisfy all of our urges and desires? No. Rebbe Nachman says the world was created for us to fix. That's what it means, for us. It was created for us to fix. And Rebbe Nachman says if you can't fix it, daven for it, at least, or even at most, maybe. But to daven for the world, every single day, 3 times a day, or at least in one Shemana Esrei at the end, daven for the world. What do you think Aleinu is? That's what Aleinu is. It's a tefillah for the rectification of the world. Lasakin oilam b'malchus shaka. That's what it is to be a Jew. It's to feel, and to bring that up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu on wings of prayer. That's Lamed Tes. Okay, now let's jump into Sichos HaRan Mem, which is a very, very long piece, like I said. So we need a lot of Siyata D'Shmaya. We're going to do our best to get to the end, and we'll try our best. It's all that we can do. Elech va'anasa, like the Viceroy says in the story. Okay, Sichos HaRan Mem. The Inyan Sifrei HaMechakron. Back to the Inyan of Emunah, back to the sugya and the conversation about philosophy vis-a-vis mysticism, vis-a-vis revelation, vis-a-vis simple faith, as opposed to a sophisticated kind of intellectualization or, sort of an academic approach to whether or not God exists. We've discussed this in the past many times in the series. But this is really the piece. This is the Sicha Mem. It's a famous Sicha. It's a long Sicha. And it begins like this. We've already discussed many times about these works that, like I said, are sophisticated philosophical works in the nature of the spiritual realm, in the nature of the deity, the creator. We've already learned many times in our writings, that it's forbidden to busy oneself with them. And it's a waste of time, and somebody needs to distance himself from them, not to learn those works, and not to look into them at all. And he's not even talking about secular works of philosophy. Even the works that were written by Gedolei Yisrael, and Chaim HaRan, he enumerates more Nevuchim, obviously from the Rambam, by name, and other works that are lesser known, but this is obviously the major one. That according to Rebbe Nachman, it was forbidden to look into these works at all. Of course, this is a matter of contention because the Rambam likely held that it was permitted to look into Mar Nevuchim. Rebbe Nachman said it was forbidden. For his Hasidim, this is what the Rebbe says. Isser Gadol Ma'od Lilmad Isam, he says it's very, very forbidden to learn. And it's brought already in many Svarim. It's famous at the Maral and the Vilna Gaon in his Bir Hagron and Yeridea, very famously spoke very strongly about the Rambam and some of his beliefs that he felt, and many feel, had been influenced by Aristotelian metaphysics. And how damaging and how forbidden it is to study these works. This is not the Jewish way. This is not the way that our grandparents walked throughout history. We have no connection with works like this. We talked at length last week and previous weeks about the importance of simple faith, about the importance of just being ma'aminim, anachnu ma'aminim b'nei ma'aminim, that we don't believe in Torah and mitzvahs because we might be able to think up reasons, and the tzaddikim were able to reveal reasons. Even the Kabbalistic-oriented tzaddikim were able to reveal certain tamei mitzvahs, but that's not why we do it, because we understand it. We do it without understanding. Isn't the foundation of our acceptance of the Torah naseh and then nishma? This is the way of Am Yisrael. So Rebbe Nachman says, we have no essential connection with works like this. Our faith is simple. Our faith is the faith not of one who needs to take a leap in order to believe in something, but of one who discovers the truth of who he is. And that's not an intellectual knowledge. It's a knowledge of being able to feel it from within. It's an experiential awareness more than it is a faith. Without any sophistication, that God created this world, and he sustains this world, and he in the future is destined to renew his world. But he says the way of these works is lahakshus kushis. They begin with a million questions, and that seem like really strong questions, paradoxes and difficult things and impossibilities in terms of our faith and the tenets of our faith that seem like very big questions. Now, the only reason they ask these questions is so that if a person should have them, they deliver an answer. That's the point. They don't want to trap people in questions. These were written by tzaddikim. But whatever answer they give, because ultimately we're not going to be able to understand certain things that are beyond the realms of time and space and limitations of the human mind, and the nature of the infinite creator precludes our ability to ever understand. And so whatever answer they give is weak, because these are not questions that are meant to be answered. And these are questions that necessitate faith. And so when we go ahead and we have this element of an answer that's given with the sort of presumption that these are questions that couldn't be answered, so then a person will just throw the whole thing away. When Misha writes a lachar yoser, Nachman says that a person who wants to press the issue, and a person is not going to be satisfied with this question, like the Chazon Ish famously said, most questions are answers, right? Most questions are not questions. Most questions are answers, and they come in the form of a question, but they're already just built on the preconceived lack of acceptance. And so the question comes in the form of a question, but it's really an answer, and it tells us more about the person than the person wants to know about Yiddishkeit. So he says, if a person wants to press past that and not accept the question, so then he'll continue, and he'll move past beyond the boundary of that particular treatment of that concept in the Sefer. And the Sefer doesn't go on to the next page, but he will. And he will wipe away the wipe away the answer, and then and then the answer won't help him. And so if you want to build your Yiddishkeit, and if I want to build my Yiddishkeit off of things that I'm able to understand, it's a very, very weak foundation. And all I need is one little Yetzer Hara, and it pushes me off the mountain because I was standing already on the edge. because I set up shop on the edge. But a person who has nothing to do with questions answers, Lo ma'anyen oti. This is what I believe. And I believe it because my father believed it, and his father before him. And I believe it because the Jewish nation, at the essence, like the Baal Tanya says, and we've learned this, believes. And we have an emunah misuseris within us. And we understand as part of our faith that doubt is okay, and that there's room for doubt. Radical as that sounds, there's room for doubt, and that's part of the Jewish experience. There's an Amalek in the world, Amalek Gematria Safek, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu set the system up so that there should be unanswerable questions, and that's the union of the Chalal HaPanui, the vacant space, and that's where faith go. Adarabah, that's not where I lose my faith. That's where my faith helps me. That's where Amunah enables me to transcend that gap and rise even higher, like we learned. So a person like that is founded on firm ground, terra firma. A person like that is not going to simply allow his whole structure to shake because of one little small question. MS, Rebbe Nachman says, anyway, all of these questions, they don't exist. And it's all shtuyot, and it's all hevel, it's all vanity. When held up against the MS Lamito, that this world was created and this world is sustained. And the HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not a philosophical God of a first cause and a first power of this, sort of unfeeling energy that brings everything into existence. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is an emotional God. He's a feeling God. He's a God that Sichos HaRan applies to even more than it applies to you and me, right? He's a God who feels the pain of the world. And he's a God who's a personal God that wants a relationship with each and every one of us. He's a God in search of man, right? He's a God who wants a relationship with us and pursues us and created us because he was lonely, and he wants us to keep him company. And he wants us to create for him a dwelling place in this world. That's the truth. And everything else is sheker. He says, what we see, people who simply don't care about the Svarim HaKadoshim, people who understand that there's something called Arizal, so who understand there's something called the Ramak and the Rashash and the Chaim Vital, and Lo ma'anyen otam, doesn't matter to them, they don't care. You can say for Azayar, say for Arizal, Kayotze. These Svarim are pile ploys. They're wonders upon wonders upon wonders of a truth that runs deeper than any possible other perspective on reality. 1,000,000 miles beyond that, 2 billion miles beyond that. Wonders of wonders. Hameir Menayim, that illuminate one's eyes, elevate one's consciousness. The sweetest taste of what Chazal say. I'm not sure if it's Chazal, but the Rishonim say, in simcha ka'tavas asfekas. Right? There's no joy like the joy of clarifying a doubt. And that's what these Svarim are. It's just the clarification of doubt in the sweetest way. And they're drawn after the quote unquote rationalistic approach to Yiddishkeit. If you go in Chakiras, and they want to everything they want to analyze in a way of academics, in a way of intellectualism. Says Rebbe Nachman, a very strong thing here. Zeu machmas mizgam. He says that it's because of their mezek, it's because of their spiritual nature or orientation. Ki mizgam betivam hu mezek ra. Because it must mean that there's something a little bit off in terms of their spiritual nature. Menatoilada shenoilad b'mezek ra must mean that they were brought into the world, and we learned this similarly about those that are drawn after Averis. If you remember, we learned that a couple of weeks ago, that there are people that, because of a certain lack of purity in the way in which their bodies were brought into this world, in the relationship between their parents, that could cause a certain impurity that's built into the physical system that can be overcome, like Rebbe Nachman says over here, but ultimately will prevent naturally that soul from accessing these truths. Again, this is one perspective. We've learned other perspectives from the other tzaddikim, even in the context of this series, where there are those who have already learned this chelek of Torah in previous Gilgulim, and so they don't need it, and they need dafka to run after the pshat. But pshat doesn't need to preclude emunah pshuta. Those two things can be true at once. But if Rebbe Nachman is speaking dafka about the tradition of mysticism, the tradition of the Zohar Kadosh and of the Arizal, Schusiyam Yagan Aleinu. So Rebbe Nachman says that they were born in this mezeg ra. They can't handle something that's truly holy. Rebbe Nachman says everybody has free choice. Everybody has bechira. And everybody can shatter that nature. But because they were born with this nature, it's going to be hard. Going to have to handle a lot of bitterness, to overcome. L'shabris mizgai, to overcome this nature that finds it very difficult to really be mivatal, to more abstract truths and to truths that require a little bit of faith. And they have a nature to question everything 2 billion times, and not to just accept certain things from tzaddikim because they came from tzaddikim, etc. It's a mezeg ra. And they can overcome this, but it takes a little bit of bitterness because it's not naturally their nature to be able to open up to teachings like this. Says Rebbe Nachman, fortunate is the person that was born in a way of kedusha, And who am I to say, but I believe that after the Holocaust, Am Yisrael is born in kedusha, even if not in the classical sense. The parents bringing children into the world after our nation was destroyed. This generation was noilid b'kedusha. Even if not in physical kedusha, whatever it is, our generation is ready. Our generation is ready in a way that we've never been before. We've never been before. So open, so natural to us, so natural. I was speaking to somebody today about a certain person that had a difficult time, and classically, by classical definition, went off the derech. And so the person was asking me some whatever about this person, and the question was put to me, so what happened? What kind of trauma or what kind of pain, and obviously there must have been some event. And I said, mamish not. I said there was no trauma. Person has a great relationship with that person's parents. There was no trauma. It's just that person wasn't given what his neshama needed in our educational system. That's all it was. There was no bells and whistles. It was just a plain old case of a soul that was deprived of what it needed for its survival. And this is the nature of our generation. Our generation was noilid b'kedusha. We're open like never before to the deepest depths of Torah and Yiddishkeit and perspective and broad-mindedness, and we're not given it, And so, of course, kids go off the derech. They don't go off the derech. They go off our derech, the one that we think that they need to walk on, but they're looking for a different derech. And it's up to us, to reinvent the derech so that our kids already find themselves on it and don't need to go anywhere. They're on the derech, they're on their derech. And it's one that we better get around, to figure out how to align ourselves with that derech. But this generation is noilid b'kedusha kazeh, very, very holy generation, a very wondrous generation. We're ready. So Rebbe Nachman goes on and he says, "V'nimtza b'sifreim kushis." He says, I'll give you an example. He says one kind of question that's asked in these works, which Rebbe Nachman, by the way, was an expert in. Rebbe Nachman said that the tzaddik emes, in Torah Samach Da'al and Likutei Moharan, the tzaddik emes, the true tzaddik, he dafka needs to go into this place. And he dafka needs to reveal that even in this place of kfira and even in this place of questions, even there's faith. And he's masakin that chalal hapanui, that vacant space, with the song of the tzaddik, the song of faith. You'll look in Likutei Moharan, the 64th lesson, where he goes at great lengths to talk about this nikuda. Rebbe Nachman says here, I'll give you one example of the questions in the Sefer. They ask questions about different elements in creation. Why is a star a star? Right, or something a little bit more spiritual that becomes manifest in the planets. Why is a mazel a luck, right, or a constellation, or there's a word I'm looking for now. But why is a mazel a mazel? And what sin did a worm do that a worm should have been created a worm? Animals, wild animals. Why wasn't it the opposite? That this star should be a worm and this worm should be a star? It's like what's the rhyme or reason for this seder of things? That things don't appear to have a seder and it doesn't appear fair. Why were the molecules of my head? Why were the molecules of my head created to become my head? The regel. And dafka, it was those molecules of my developing embryo that became legs, and this part of the body became a head. Why? Why wasn't it the opposite? That whatever makes up my head should have been my feet should have been my head. And he says, as is known that these Sfarim are filled with questions like this. So be'emes, says Rebbe Nachman, of course, I call hevel rusrach. What are you wasting your time asking questions like that? As if you're going to find an answer? Are you the creator? Are you the one that that could have brought this whole thing into being? That you are positioned to decide what should be where, or to question the one who decided where things should be? What answer do you think you're going to get? From whom? From the silent God that doesn't speak? Certainly not about these things, and certainly not to a person who asks questions like this, but rather to a person who opens his or her heart and mind up to those things that HaKadosh Baruch Hu already did without questioning. What's the function? Rebbe Nachman says it's all hevel rus ruach. It's futile to go ahead and challenge and to ask these things of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Tzaddik v'yasharu. Everything that he did was tzaddik, was righteous, was yashar. Ube'emes. Rebbe Nachman says, listen, let me tell you the truth. If you're curious about why things are the way that things are, let me tell you a secret. Nothing is the way that it is. Listen to Rebbe Nachman's answer to this question once we're on the topic. And this is the secret of the Dreidel. Ube'emes da. Rebbe Nachman says you should know. Ki kol olam kuli hu b'chinas galgal hachozer. Everything is revolving all the time. Shakar, and they wrote Sivivon, but it really originally obviously is Dreidel, right? Shakar and Dreidel. So anytime we see Sivivon, which is the Hebraic sort of, form of Dreidel, but we're going to say Dreidel because that's how it is in the original. The whole world is a Dreidel. Everything revolves. And everything is constantly revolving all the time. And it's hapech me adam malach malach adam. And people are becoming angels are becoming people. Every aspect of the world, which is the element of a head, is becoming feet, and feet are becoming heads. Everything is spinning around, and becoming transformed, and switching from one to the other and one to the other. Everything is revolving all the time. We're just not aware of it. And so we think that certain elements are what they are, but the truth is everything's being switched, everything's being swapped out all the time. It's a very, very amazing concept. Because what do we know about most of the objective world? How do we know that the Niagara Falls that we see one day is the same Niagara Falls as the next day? How do we know that? How do we know the Niagara Falls on one day that is Niagara Falls as it exists isn't actually a whole herd of buffalo somewhere in, say, Buffalo, right? How do we know? And that all of a sudden the next day somehow HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes that energy, revamps it, reforms it, and it becomes something else. What do we know about the world? What do we know about the way things are? Rebbe Nachman says like this. He says, in truth, and this is very deep, there's a spiritual source, and this is what the Mekubalim, the emanationists, the Mekubalim brought to the fore, this understanding of creation as a process of progression, but everything progresses from one source. And in that source, HaKol Echad, all of the variations that mix and combine in compounds to create the physical world around us, Eish, Mayim, Ruach, Afar, these elements of fire, of water, of earth, and of wind, the elements of domim, someach, chaim, and daber, inanimate, plant life, animal kingdom, and human beings. But everything comes from Echad Yachad Miyuchad. That's our fundamental belief. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, even that which is Elokeinu, even that which is Teva, even that which is natural, even that which is externally apparent. And the world around us is filled with a multifarious conglomeration of different elements. Hashem Echad, everything is one. Kiyesh nivdalim, says Rebbe Nachman, there's the element of creation that's called nivdalim, which literally means from the word havdalah, right, or hevdel, it means removed, separate from, dahainu malachim, which are angels, shehem nivdalim lagamri min hachomer, they're called that because they are completely and entirely separated from physicality. That's the highest level of creation. Yesh galgalim, and then there are the galgalim, which really means, circles, right, like a galgal is a wheel. They are physical, but their physicality is very, very, very slight, right? It's very, very slight. It's very, very delicate. It's very purified form of physicality. So it's a step lower than the angels, but it's still a step higher than the physical world. And that's going to be like the mazalos, right? The constellations, and what colloquially is called the zodiac, but they are found in the works of Kabbalah. Whether the world knows what to do with those or not, that's a separate conversation. But the 12 mazalos, right, which are connected to the 12 months of the year, all of those are called are called the inyan of galgalim, right? Which are sort of a halfway point between physical and completely spiritual. And then we have the olam hashafel. Then we have this physical world, this completely physical world, chomer gamur, which is completely corporeal. Of course, they all emanate from a specific place, and everything goes back to the 4 letters of Yud Kei Vav Kei, as is enumerated very, very dearly and sweetly in the lengthy note of Rav Chaim Volozhiner, son of Itzel Volozhiner, between the first and second chalakim of Nefesh HaChaim. It's called Hagas Ma'aritz, I believe. And over there he speaks about the Nakud of Tselem, and he speaks about how those 3 letters, Tselem, correlate to the first 3 letters of Yud Kei Vav Kei, Yud Kei Vav, and then the final Hey is the Kli for all of these elements. But these 3 letters, the Yud, the Kei, and the Vav, correlate to these 3 elements, to the Nivdalim, to the angels, to the element of the Galgalim, and then to the element of the shuffle of the physical world. And Rebbe Nachman says over here, everything comes from its specific place. But in the source, hakol sham kulay chad, everything is one. Therefore, because everything is drawn from one unified source, everything is always revolving all the time, switching from one to the other, from one to the other. Right now, this thing, a certain object or a certain element of an element of creation is the roish, is the top, is the elevated part, and something else is a lowly element, regel, the element of a foot. But afterwards, everything becomes switched around. Because again, everything draws on one source. So why shouldn't everything become able to be transformed? We find this idea of a person being able to become an angel, and we find angels becoming Adam. Like we find that angels were cast down from heaven onto the physical world, and they became literal people. Because the psukim say that they went ahead and cohabited with the woman that they saw, and so that would mean that they actually took on physical form. So we find that angels could become people. And he says, the opposite is also true. That there were angels that came in this world. Right? There are people that became angels. Because the world is always flipping around one to the next. Dreidel. It's one big dreidel. It's one big mix of things that become blended within the unity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When you spin it fast enough, it again reflects the unity from which it derives, which is a very, very deep thing. We'll get back to that in a minute. Everything is one. So I just want to go down to the notes first before we get to the end of the piece, and 2 fascinating pieces. One from the Yalkut Shemaini. This is really an amazing teaching. An amazing teaching about those malachim that were sent down to the world, right? And that became lowly, and they became the Nephilim. And we learned that at the very end of Parshas Bereshis that the giants, right? These were the giants, Mimei Olam, that were that were the progeny and the children and the offspring of these angels that were sent down to this world that took on human form. So the Hilgi Yalkut says like this. Listen to this. Mamish mind blowing. Shalu Talmidav es Rabbi Yosef. The Talmidim asked Rabbi Yosef, Mao Azael. There's this name Azael in different girsas. It's actually Azazel. That they were asking him, what is Azazel, which is more likely than them asking him about this name. But it could be they were learning about this name. But I think they were asking him about Azazel, because you'll see from the last line that it makes sense. They were asking what Azazel was. Amalei, he said, Kivin sha'amdu dara mabul va'avdu avodah zara ha'akadosh baruch hu mesatze. The pasuk says that when the generation of the flood was serving avodah zara, was stealing, was shrichas dam, gilei arayis, like we learned about in our Tash series in Parshas Noach, mesatzev miyad. Right, Misyatzev. HaKadosh Baruch Hu became a little bit sad, whatever that means. Amdu shnei malachim, 2 angels stood up. Sham Chazai, this name Sham Chazai, the Azael or Azazel, which was a malach. But Amr Lefanim, and they said before him, Rebbeinu Shalom, Didn't we tell you? Didn't we tell you? We told you so. We told you when you were creating the world, what do you want with this thing called a human being? What are you doing? Why are you creating this world? They're going to sin. Amar Le. And so HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, so good, but what's going to be with the world? Right? If I don't save humanity by keeping Noach and his 3 sons and family in the boat, what's going to be with the world? They said, don't worry. They said, we'll uphold the world. Send us down, and we'll show humanity how it's done. Amalei HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, good. I want you to know that it's revealed before me. That if you were to live in the world for one day, you'd fail much more strongly than the human beings failed. Try it. We'll send you down for a day. We'll see how you do. I love this medrash. Listen to this. He said, give us permission. Let us dwell with humanity. You'll see how we'll sanctify your name in this world with the best of intentions. Mamash, you didn't know what they were getting themselves into. It sounds cute from our perspective. Very nice, Malachim. Okay, come and see what fun we're having here. Yeah, it sounds very idealistic, right? Amalei Redu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, great, go down. But to do and go dwell with people. Miyad kilkulu in B'nai Adam. The 30 seconds later, it's like miyad. Like they didn't no stops along the way. Miyad kilkulu in B'nai Adam. They saw a couple of women. Shem yafas lichvash as yitzram, and they couldn't rein in their desires. And that was the end of that story. They didn't last a minute. They don't last a minute. So we need to give ourselves a little bit of chizik. It's such a chizik, this medrash, right? Because we want to be mekadeshim shemayim. And guess what? We do 99.9% of the time. We're also human beings, and we fall from time to time. And we go through what we go through. We have to understand that the angels above, couldn't do much better when they were given the opportunity. Shamchazai chazer b'tshuva. The medrash says that Shamchazai returned, and he did tshuva, whatever that means. And he hung himself between heaven and earth with his feet above and his head below. And he's still hanging out there, quite literally and metaphorically, in tshuva. And Azel, which we're saying is Azazel, this malach did not do tshuva. And he's still at it. And he's still in this kind of existence of kilkul, lahasis b'nei adam, ladvar avera, and to go ahead and to cause people to sin. And he shows up a big day tziva'onim shal nashim, and immoral clothing of women. And this is why we go ahead and we bring these karbanos Yom Kippur, and that's why I said his name was Azazel. Ayel echad Lashem. One carbon, we're bringing the Ayel Hashem Sheyichaper Yisrael to go ahead and to atone for Am Yisrael. Ayel Echad LaAzazel, and one we're bringing for Azazel Sheyizbel V'Neseim Yisrael Hu Azazel Shabbatayra, and this is the Azazel that's referred to in the Torah. Was this Malach that was sent down at the end of Parshas Bereshis, who came down with the best of intentions to be Mekadeshim Shemayim, but then learned very quickly what this world is all about. And then the Heilige Pardes teaches us about the opposite, and this is also a very beautiful sort of expression. We'll do this quickly. And the Sefer Eichales, Amar Rabbi Yishmael says, Sha'altiv lematat. He says, I asked this malach called Matat. I pronounce the whole name. It's a certain malach. Why are you on such a high level that this malach is called Shmoi Kishem Rabbi? He's very, very, very high kind of malach that HaKadosh Baruch Hu sort of manifests within to go ahead and to run the 6 days of the week and the governance of this world. It's associated with Zeir Anpin. It's a very high level. Matat, why are you zeicha to such a thing? You're the highest malach. You're bigger than any of the other spiritual forces. And you're more elevated and mechubad than all of the legions of angels. And you're much bigger than all of the others in terms of your greatness and your kingship and your honor. Hey Shiv, he answered, and he said to me, and this is Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol speaking, the Talmud of Rabbi Nachman ben Akana, and he says, I am Chanoich ben Yered. which we speak about at the end of Parshas Bereshis. When the Dara Mabel made their error and it started to live in an inappropriate way, and they said to God, essentially, get away from us. HaKadosh Baruch Hu took me from them. Rashi brings this down. It's a Targum Yerushalmi as well. Elias aid aleim, to be a witness upon them. B'shmei marim above l'chol bay olam. The kivin shenel chani HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as the pasuk says, ki lakach hoysay elikim, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu took him because, and this was chanaych, because I was taken l'shamish as kisei hakavod, to service the kisei hakavod as galgal hamerkava and the galgal of the merkava as called sarchi hashchina, and all of the needs of the shchina. Miyad, listen to what happened to this person. He was an individual. He was a human being. Nehepach besari el shal heves. My flesh became a torch. The gidai va'atzmaisel gachali resamim, and my veins and sinews became gachali resamim, became like glowing coals. Va'ar afapai, and the light of my eyes l'zayar barakim, became mamish like an illumination of planets. V'galgal inayim, and the sockets of my eyes lapid eish, was this ring of fire around them. Asaras roishi, my hair, the lahat became just an incredible lahat, an incredible flickering conflagration, lahava, and a torch, v'choli vare lekanfe eish, and all my limbs became wings of fire, but eres, burning wings of fire, of a goof kaimasi, and my form le'eshia kedes became also this dancing, flickering fire. From my right hand was shooting out, incredible streams of fire. And from my left hand by Ari lapide eish, torches of fire, usvivoisai, around me, mafrachais ruach sa'ar of a sufa, an incredible wind, hot wind of ash and fire is blowing around me, the kol rash, and a tremendously loud sound, v'ram milefanai, u'malachayrai, goes out from before me and from behind me. And so this is just an image, a little bit of imagery to think about what happened to this individual Chanukah when he was taken up, and how his whole being turned into just all these different kinds of fire. I found that fascinating. So upon him, you see that there are those that became different things. There were angels that became human. There were human that became angels. Things switch. So Rebbe Nachman continues and he says, this is why on Chanukah we are playing with the Dreidel. Because Chanukah is the element of the Beis HaMikdash. And when we're going ahead and we're lighting the menorah, it's mamish, not that we're lighting the menorah as a commemoration, a mitzvah d'Rabbanan, we're lighting the menorah of the Beis HaMikdash. Rav Nassan says that what we ordinarily do, aliyah l'regel, for the three Yom Tovim of Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, on Purim and Chanukah, but specifically Chanukah, we become the Beis HaMikdash, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes to be Oila l'regel to us, and he comes to visit our house, and that's the sod of our lighting the menorah. Lamata me'asar tavachim, a place the Gemara in Sukkah says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shechina never comes throughout the year, but he comes to visit us in our homes. Hashem is Oila regel on Chanukah. He comes, where he comes to the Beis HaMikdash that is our house. So the whole thing of Chanukah is the Chanukah's Beis HaMikdash. The whole story was about the restoration and the rededication of the Beis HaMikdash. That's why it's called Chanukah. It's the Chanukah's Habayis. It's the rededication of the Beis HaMikdash that was rebuilt afterwards, and the menorah is the menorah of the Beis HaMikdash. And he says, you know what the Beis HaMikdash was? It was a place of faith. It was a place where you walked in and you understood that there's one shorish, there's one spiritual root to everything in creation, and everything goes up and down, and everything is switching, and we don't know anything. We can't say anything definitive about this world because HaKadosh Baruch was manning this world in such a way where everything is always switching from one thing to the next, and things are happening all the time. But like we said, the turning wheel, the wheel of life, and the wheel of Gilgulim, and the wheel of how things turn, and the bottom becomes the top. A mashpil game, mashpil game, that's HaKadosh Baruch was constantly changing things around, and that was the Beis HaMikdash embodied. The Beis HaMikdash was a place where what was below became elevated to above, and what was above became brought down to below. And that means that a flame came down from heaven, but the karbanos would be eaten, and the would go up. And that was the Beis HaMikdash, was everything going down and everything going up. And in the hepech, right? Or rather, Ki Hashem Yisbarach Hishur Shchinasa b'Mishkan. Hashem descended into the Mishkan of Beis Hamikdash. This is another element, the primary element of that which is above, coming down below. The opposite is also true, called shiur the Mishkana, the whole form of the Mishkan of the Beis Hamikdash. Everything was above. Everything was arranged in the format of spiritual forces above. We were able to elevate the physical world and to make it out of pillars and out of sheets and out of all these different materials, but and carbonis, the most physical elements of this world, and to elevate it above. Dreidel. And he says this is the inner Dreidel, that everything constantly is switching, everything is constantly spinning. Oh, this is so deep. This is so deep. I wish I had another hour to talk about this. Now I don't, but we might have to go a little bit over time. This is so deep. I'm going to just reveal a little bit of the amkus here, but let's first finish the piece. Because again, in accordance with sophisticated philosophizing, how does the mind understand that? That the infinite God to constrict himself to come into a physical building, the mind can't comprehend it. How does that even work? HaKadosh Baruch Hu is infinite. What does that mean that he is found by the Koisel Amarabi that we spoke about? What does that mean that the Shechina Shora in a certain place? What does that mean? But HaKadosh Baruch Hu showed up in a place of faith to say, you're right. Doesn't make sense using your intellect. Doesn't make sense with academic knowledge. But I'll call Panim. Hashem says, Afal Pikin, I came down and I put myself in this building. That because Hashem did dwell and does dwell in the Mishkan of the Beis Hamikdash. How could it be that a human being has the ability to impact all the spiritual realms above? It's so distant. That a lowly person that we can have an impact above a behema shvela, or that an animal, a physical animal, is able to have an impact in the worlds above. We should bring the carbon should talo the reach nichoyach and Hashem should have some pleasure from this. What does this mean? This is not rational. The mind can't understand that. That we're doing what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to do, and that's enough. How does it make sense that Hashem wants something, and beforehand HaKadosh Baruch Hu was angry, and now we placate HaKadosh Baruch Hu's anger? God doesn't change, God can't change. So the philosophical mind can't reconcile any of these things, and they remain questions. So we need Emunah. The Beis Hamikdash is the place where all this went down, which means the Beis Hamikdash was the place of faith. It was the place of everything switching around, everything going back to its one unified root. It was the place of faith. It was the place of faith. And that's what Chanukah is. But he says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu be'emes, no, Hashem Yisbarach Hishur Shechinah Salamata. That's the truth. B'Mishkan of Beis Hamikdash, HaKadosh Baruch Hu did do this. Ubehema, also the Reach Nichoyach. And he says that if you bring a carbon, it makes me happy. Whatever that means, it makes him happy. But v'chule v'zeh b'chinas al yoinam lamata v'tachtoinam lamala b'chinas galgal achoyzer b'chinas dreidel. This is the nikud of a dreidel. And this is why we're playing with a dreidel on Chanukah, because Chanukah is the Bechina of the Beis Hamikdash. The Beis Hamikdash was the whole thing. The Beis Hamikdash was the place of faith, in which everything was flipping around, and that which was above came down below, and that which was below went up above, and it made no sense, but it was just the faith of understanding that this is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants, and so this is how things are. And so we play with the dreidel, because the dreidel is that element of everything switching around, everything's constantly in motion, everything's constantly revolving in this world of faith, even though it doesn't make sense to the philosophical mind. So he finishes, there's one other element in creation that we didn't discuss before that's called hiyuli, which in English is called Heil, right? And the Greek philosophers actually spoke about this, paradoxically enough. They also spoke about this thing called Heil, and the word hiyuli is taken from their Greek Heil. But the Ramban brings it, and right at the beginning of Parashas Bereshit, if you look in the Parashas Ramban on the word bara, Bereshit is bara elikim, and the Ramban goes at length to speak about this material called Heil, and it's a sort of silly putty, spiritually, that can be used to create anything. It is not nothing; it's a yesh, but from it can be formed any possible a kind of creation. Eish, mayim, ruach, afar, domim, tzameach, chaim, adaber, anything. It all comes from this non-material, which is a material, but it's a non-material, but from it, everything is made. This is called hiyuli. Look at the Ramban, you'll see over there on Parshas Bereshis on the word bara. But he says this is the thing, it's called hiyuli. And so he says like this, he says it's the aspect of the midpoint between potential and actuality. Everything first exists within the potential for the thing to exist spiritually. And then it becomes practically created. When it leaves the realm of potential, so it's not nothing, but it's not something yet, but it's not nothing. Before coming in to the element of actuality, it enters into this stage of being hayal, hiyuli, which is in between the koach and the pa. Which is the unified source that we were making reference to before, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu uses, like the material that he uses to form everything in creation. Everything comes out of this non-material, this material which is associated with the spiritual world of Bria, which is Yesh Me'ayin, but we're not getting into that now. But everything is sourced in Bria. Everything is sourced in Bina, which is the level of Hiyuli. Everything begins in this element of Hiyuli. And everything that comes out then is fit into three categories. Either it's the inyan of Nivdal, which is the completely spiritual beings like angels, or it's the Nakuda of Galgalim, which we spoke about as being those sort of in between spiritual and physical, which is the Mazalis, the constellations as manifest in different planets and planetary bodies. And then Shvalim, which is everything in our physical world. And then again, the divisions continue within our physical world. And within those there are divisions and so on and so forth. But everything begins at the shirish is hiyul. The kulam chayzim chalila. And again, everything is always turning. Everything is turning. Because at the source, everything is one. So why not? Why shouldn't a chair become a cow? And why shouldn't that cow then become a pair of scissors? Why not? Everything comes from the echad, yachad, and yuchad. Why shouldn't that be possible? Nothing is set in motion the way that we see, or set in stone rather the way that we see it. Everything is einod mavada. Why shouldn't everything be switching all the time? And with this we'll finish. I apologize for going a little bit over time. And this is the letters that are written on the dreidel. This is unbelievable. Sheim nun gimel hey shin. All of us know why is nun gimel hey shin, because nes gadol haya sham. In Eretz Yisrael, it's a pay. They switch that. Nes gadol haya poi, right? But ultimately, throughout the galuyas, all the dreidels had on it. Rebbe Nachman's dreidel certainly had nun gimel hey shin, which was nes gadol haya sham. Says Rebbe Nachman, I'll give you a new Rosh Tevis. These four letters are Rosh Tevis hiyuli, which is the unified source from which everything comes. That's the hey. Nin. The nun is the nivdal, is the element of the angels. The gimel is galgal, which is the realm of the constellations. And then the shin is shuffle, is our physical world. Nun gimel hey shin hiyuli, the unified source. And then the three general categories of creation that come from it, which is nivdal, galgal, shuffle. Nun gimel hey shin. Shem klau kol habriya, which include everything in creation. Everything. You won't find anything in creation that doesn't fit into one of these three categories. And he says, Shekulam chayzim chalila. Everything is spinning around. Everything is constantly switching one thing to the next because everything is going back to the source, because the HaKadosh Baruch Hu fills everything, and he's the echad, yachid, and miyuchad. The shazem rumas b'Chanukah. And he says, that's why we're using the dreidel dafkan Chanukah. Chanukah's ha-beis ha-mikdash, because again, it's the Chanukah's beis ha-mikdash, and the beis ha-mikdash is the place of el yoinim lamata and tachtoinim lamala. Sheshama ibachinas el yoinim lamata and tachtoinim lamala. She's a bechinas dreidel, bechinas galgal ha-choyzer, and it's happened bechinas zu lezu, the bechinas zu umizu lezu. For everything is switching because everything's going back to the shirish, because we believe that there's a creator of this world, and we therefore believe that everything is able to draw back on that original force and can become something else. And this is the redemption. Kizel Ikra Geula, this is the primary essence of the redemption. Shibachina Hanal, Shibachinas Chayzeres Chalila Kanal, Bachinas Alyonim Lamata, Vidachtenim Lamala, Shem Bebeis HaMikdash. This is what it means to come back to the Beis HaMikdash. It means to come back to faith. It means to go ahead and to be existing in a situation where all of a sudden, like Rebbe Nachman says, that it's possible that everything can turn around for the good. How can it turn around for the good? Situations are set. And if I'm in a situation by nature where I'm stuck in my personal limitations, it is what it is. Says Rebbe Nachman, you know what redemption means? To realize nothing is what it is. Nothing is what it is. And in a moment, everything can change because HaKadosh Baruch Hu fills all. And if you draw back on that elemental source, on that Hiyuli, everything is possible. That's the redemption. That's the redemption that brings us back to the Beis HaMikdash, the place of faith. And he says, this is the pshat on the pasuk. They all came, Mitzrayim, when they left Mitzrayim, take if B'shir Sayam. What did they say? To the aim of it, bring us and implant us on the mountain of your inheritance, which is the Beis HaMikdash. Because redemption is bound up with this element of the Beis HaMikdash. 1 minute they're slaves, the next minute they're free men on top of the world. How does that happen? Because the echad yachad miyuchad. We could draw on the source, we could be anything. And they already were talking about the building of the Beis HaMikdash. He's a ikra geula because that's what it means to be redeemed. Because over there in that place, everything is switching around. Because everything is one. And that's the redemption. Everything is one. The realization that God fills all and that everything draws on Him. And therefore, anything can change and anything can be different. And we don't have a question. Why was a head and not a foot? Because what do we know about the head being a head and the foot being a foot? Everything is switching around all the time, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu has His plan. And this is one example where Rebbe Nachman is saying one example of a question in philosophical works that just doesn't start to the faith-oriented person. It's just not a question. It's not a question. Everything is switching. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is running the world in the most wondrous way. We'll speed read through the end, and I want to tell you two things, and we'll come to a close. So Rebbe Nachman says this also shows up in the Kutmaram Tinyana Torah Zion, which I bless us to be able to learn together. So Rebbe Nachman says over here, there are also Rosh Tevis, Ga'alta, Shevet, Nachalascha, Har Tzir. Another Rosh Tevis, which reference Geula, Ga'alta Shevet Nachlasecha. You have redeemed the Shevet Nachlasecha, your nation. Har Tzia, in a reference to the Beis HaMikdash. Also Rosh Tevis, Nun, Gimel, Hey, Shin, the 4 letters on the Dreidel, which are Hiyuli, Nivdal, Galgal, Shuffle. Also a reference to the redemption, because that's the redemptive consciousness, is this consciousness of oneness. Like we said, she's how ikra geula kanal, an amazing piece. The ayin v'mayim l'kudim rantinyan zayin and number of Chanukah zeh amaschil v'yihimiketz kimerachma v'nagim, a very lengthy Torah over there. Sham v'vur kemi in elyon l'mata tachtan v'lamala. We speak about over there also what goes up and what goes down and up and down. And in Chanukah we speak about Chanukah. Chanukah's Beis HaMikdash ayin sham. See there zebachinas makifan and number of B'mayim. This is the concept of those forces that surround in that lesson. Also circular, the Hainu Sivivon, Hanal, the Dreidel, okay, that's for a different time. We'll learn all that. Okay, but we go back to the first thing that we started with. And again, this is the culmination of Rebbe Nachman's teachings on Emunah as they show up in Sichos HaRan. The next piece, Be'ez Hashem, next week, something entirely different. It's all Emunah, but it's something entirely different. Rebbe Nachman sums it up. We do not need these works. It's a waste of time. A person has to make a cheshbon for himself. I only have a certain amount of time in my life. So should I spend years and years clarifying the foundations of my faith and a way of philosophy? And then once I feel pretty certain about it, then I'll use the rest of my time. Why waste the time? We're anyway going to come to the realization that this is the MS. Jump right in. We only have a limited amount of time in our day. If we have a certain amount of time to learn, why not learn the Sfarim of the Ariya Kodesh? Why not learn the Zohar Kodesh? Why not learn the Gemara? Why not learn the Midrashim? Why not learn Shulchan Aruch? Why not learn those works that are already substantive for the believer, instead of spending all my time getting to the place where I allow myself to believe and then jump into it? It's much simpler and it saves us lots of time. Isser Galam Ha'oid by Breslover was a very, very forbidden thing. We believe in Hashem because we believe in Him. Period. Done. Two points, and then we're going to finish mamish. This is Nakuda the Dreidel. Two sort of kavanas to have when we're playing Dreidel. People think it's a joke. It's a kid's game. It's not a kid's game. It's very, very deep. The Svarim HaKadoshim are marach. The Bnei Yissaschar has a glorious mimer. Maybe we'll be zochah to learn it together. Glorious on the sodos of the Dreidel. Like not to be believed, like a pili applies. But the world doesn't know. They don't know anything, largely. We don't know anything. And so we think that the dreidel is just a game. It's the deepest. It's the deepest in the world. But Al Kapanim over here, I just want to point out two things. Let's review quickly. Rebbe Nachman says that we play with the dreidel on Chanukah because Chanukah is an aspect of the Beis HaMikdash. And the Beis HaMikdash was the embodiment of faith in which all things are changing one from the other because nothing's really changing, because everything is already drawing on the Echad Yachad Miyuchad, the source from which everything derives, which is the level of hiyuli, which is that elemental material, and therefore everything can become anything else because we believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is running the world in such a way where that which is above can become below, that which is below can become above. It doesn't make sense. It's faith, it's emunah, and that's what the Beis HaMikdash represented. And that's since Chanukah is connected to that element of the Beis HaMikdash. On Chanukah, we play with a dreidel, which represents things switching all the time. And on the dreidel, we have the letters Nun, Gimel, He, Shin, which are hiyuli, which is that elemental force. And then we have the three general categories of creation, which are nivdal, galgal, and shuffle. These four letters are also Rashi Tevis Ga'alta Shevet Nachlasecha Har Tzion. Why? Because this is a redemptive consciousness. If we can hold on to this awareness that Hashem is running the world and that everything draws on the oneness, and to reveal that oneness and that everything can change, that's the foundation of redemption. And that's why the Rashi Tevis of this pasuk, which is a reference to the redemption of Am Yisrael, is also going to be Rashi Tevis Hiyuli, Galgal, Shuffle, and Nivdal. Okay. But I want to tell you two other nakudas very, very quickly. First, notice that when we spin the dreidel, all the while that it's spinning, it stays upright. And the moment that it stops, it falls over. And this is because ba'omek, it is only a consciousness that sees HaKadosh Baruch Hu as actively involved in creation, in the way of Nun Gimel Haitian spinning around all the time because God is creating everything and everything draws on His oneness that's manifest in a diverse world, that creation is buzzing, that creation is alive, that creation is mikuyam, that creation is standing up. But the second that we lose that, or the second that that element of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's oneness manifest in creation is gone, the dreidel falls over, because that would mean that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not actively involved in every single facet of creation. That's one thing. The other thing I want to say is very, very deep. It's very deep. We don't have time now. We're already way beyond our time, and I apologize for that. I like to keep it to an hour. This is a very important piece, and we wanted to learn it in its entirety. But this is the last thing, mamish. One more thing. The final thing is that when we spin the dreidel, we cease to see the distinct letters, which means to say that when you hold the dreidel in your hand, you can flip it over. You can analyze every segment of creation. Hiyuli, the source, Nivdal, angelic, the spiritual realm, Galgal, the realm that's in between, and then shuffle, this world with everything this world encompasses, which is just one Hebrew word, shuffle, everything we'll ever encounter. So beautiful and neat, fits into that category, right? And we can flip it over. But the most incredible, beautiful thing about this world is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants that in our experience of all different categories of creation, in our experience of Eish Ruach Mayim Avar, in our experience of Domim Sameach Chaim Medaber, in our experience of the plethora of life, and like we spoke in the first piece, in the good moments, in the sad moments, in all of life, and our awareness that everything draws on the oneness, then each and every experience that we have doesn't detract from the oneness. It becomes blended within it. So that when we spin the dreidel, that's the unity. That's the unity. A blur of all the letters, of Nun Gimel He Shin coming together as one. That the multiplicity of this world actually contributes to the revelation of the unity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu as extroverted, as manifest throughout the multiplicity of this worldliness. And so that sort of brings to the outside what Hashem contains Kiviyahu inside and sort of unfolds it so that we can see. But ultimately, when we spin the dreidel, we're looking at it and we're realizing that if we're going to have this consciousness of everything drawing on one source and therefore everything changing and HaKadosh Baruch Hu being active participant in this world and anything being possible, which is redemptive, That's the unity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And then we stop seeing shuffle, galgal, nivdal, hiyuli. We stop seeing things as being independent categories. All we see is ein od milvado, and there's no redemption greater than that. And so I bless us, friends. I apologize for keeping you so long. I bless us, whoever's left. I bless us with a redemptive Chanukah, with a Chanukah that when we sit with our kids and we play the dreidel, to them it's a game. And maybe to them it's not a game. Maybe we can teach them a little bit in an age-appropriate way. We can teach them what they can handle about these ideas, right? And about how things can turn around and transform. We can teach that lesson to our kids. But Al Kapanim, when we're looking at the dreidel, you have to have big kavanas, nun gimel heishin, hiyuli, nivdal, gagel, shuffle, unbelievable levels that are very lofty, that are very exalted. And it should be a Chanukah full of faith. It should be a Chanukah full of believing that anything's possible, that miracles do happen. And I bless us to experience that miracle and those miracles in our lives. B'siyata d'shmaya. I apologize for keeping you waiting. I will not talk anymore. I promise. Have a most wonderful, wonderful rest of your day. And Be'ez Hashem, we'll see you next week, I hope, if I'm lucky enough. Okay, thank you, Chaver. Thank you so much for joining. Have a most wonderful rest of your day and rest of your week. All the best. Thank you so much. Bracha, thank you so much, Yosef. Thanks for joining. To all the Chaver here, Schwarzer Wolf, Gewalt, love that name. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thank you so much.